Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. The former Brabham team have one of the most interesting histories of any race team. Really, it's all over the place. From the highs of championship wins to the lows of going out of business mid-season, Brabham did it all. And they have an interesting cast of characters who raced for the team in their 30 years in Formula 1. In the last few years, we have looked at every Ferrari driver, every Williams driver, and every McLaren driver in Formula 1 ever. Now for the first time, a team that has been long dead, and therefore there won't be any new drivers to add to this list. This is the main Brabham team only, or the main Brabham team known by its 300 other names, such as Motor Racing Developments, Team Fina, Martini Racing and so on. This list does not include the many customer Brabham entries that went alongside over the years. So it starts with the team founded by Jack Brabham in 1962 to the team that died halfway through 1992. This is the list of every Brabham Formula 1 driver ever, from worst to best. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and let's jump right into the first 14 of 42 Brabham drivers. Number 42, Giorgio Francia. We start with a couple of drivers who never actually got to race for the team. Italian Giorgio Francia was the 1974 German Formula 3 champion, and despite not accomplishing much beyond that, he was given a Brabham for the 1977 Italian Grand Prix. He was withdrawn in practice and never got to race. He would later try again in 1981 for Osella, but failed to qualify on that occasion too. Better known as a sports car and touring car driver, Giorgio Francia spent the majority of his career as a Fiat test driver and raced Alfa Romeos and Lancias in various categories, most notably for Alfa in DTM. He never won any championships after 1974 and retired from racing in the mid-90s. Number 41, Giovanna Amati. One of the final Brabham drivers and the last female to race in Formula 1 as of 2023, as if they're any closer to getting another female on the grid. She joined a Brabham team well on the decline. She wasn't completely incapable, having spent several years racing International F3000, but she had never scored points in that series despite taking part in over 30 races. Her 3 attempts at getting onto a Formula 1 grid were a complete disaster. She spun constantly and failed to qualify, with times around 10 seconds off pole at the 3 races she entered. She was sacked and replaced by future champion Damon Hill. Amati would go on to make appearances in sports car racing, but never with any notable success. Number 40, Francois Hesnault. The unfortunate Frenchman joined Brabham after a season with Ligier, where he scored no points but showed signs of occasional competence. His 4 appearances with Brabham in 1985 were not good. He was slow in qualifying to the point where he didn't actually qualify for Monaco, crashed out of his first start with the team, and retired from the other 2 starts. He had a massive practice crash that would lead to him retiring from motorsport not long after his short stint with Brabham, and a one-off appearance for Renault mid-season, which is notable for a couple of reasons. It was the final time a team was allowed to run a third car in a race, and the first ever time an onboard camera was fitted to a Formula 1 car, now standard technology. These things are more interesting than Francois Hesnault himself. Number 39, Gregor Wojtek. I feel like the Swiss driver has come up a lot on this channel. Not bad, seeing as he accomplished so little. The former Eurobrun driver, check out this video to hear about that disaster, joined Brabham in 1990. He only did the first 2 races and retired from both, and being replaced by David Brabham thereafter. If you look at his qualifying performances, they were maybe slightly better than David's, and he never did fail to qualify, but it was still a very bad time for the Swiss driver. He'd joined Onyx for a few races, another terrible F1 team we've looked at here, and was then done with Formula 1. Within a couple of years he was done with motorsport. Number 38, Giancarlo Baghetti. The last Formula 1 driver to win on their debut all the way back in 1961 for FISA. The Italian did 1 race for Brabham towards the end of his time in Formula 1 at the 1965 Italian Grand Prix. It was only 12 laps before his engine blew, and his racing career would be over within a couple of years of this appearance. Number 37, David Brabham. The son of the founder made his triumphant return to the family team in 1991. It was no longer the team his dad had founded so long previously. David Brabham had won the British Formula 3 Championship and the Macau Grand Prix in 1989 and was a perfect fit for Brabham in 1990. The car was slow and unreliable. David Brabham only finished 1 race in 14 attempts, 15th at the French Grand Prix. He'd get dumped from Brabham at year's end because he was too poor, but would return to Formula 1 in 1994 with Simtech, the Brabham team a distant memory. It went about the same, however, and David transitioned to touring cars and sports car racing, where he has had great success, winning Le Mans, the American Le Mans Series, the Bathurst 1000 and Super GT. Recently, he has started his own car company, Brabham Automotive, that made a couple of very attractive cars. He took them racing and they have since gone quiet. Their website and Twitter page haven't been updated since 2021, so I don't know what the future of the Brabham name is. Probably best David Brabham stays away from Formula 1, and his brother Gary should stay away from kids. Number 36, Eric van der Poel. I am a big fan of Eric van der Poel, but his time in Formula 1 was depressingly short. In his 29 entries in Formula 1, Van der Poel failed to qualify 24 times, but he did almost finish second with the Modena team in 1991 and was one of the few starters in Brabham's final season, finishing 13th at the opening round at South Africa. The Belgian would go on to have a decent touring car and sports car career, with wins in the Spanish Touring Car Championship and in his class at Le Mans, but it was never the F1 career the 1987 GTM champion and runner-up in the International F3000 series in 1990 should have had. Also, he was pants in the British touring cars. Number 35, Teddy Pile. Another Belgian, and this one only took part in one Grand Prix, the two-time European F5000 champion, Teddy Pile. He wasn't much slower than the normal two Brabham drivers, Ricky von Opel and Carlos Reutemann, and when they retired from the race, Teddy Pile was the last Brabham involved, finishing 17th, 4 laps down. A couple of years later, he would attempt to qualify for a very sick BRM team and would make multiple appearances at Le Mans with no great success, and also failed to qualify for the Indy 500 several times. His racing career would finally end in the late 80s. Number 34, Larry Perkins. The Australian raced some weird cars in Formula 1. He debuted with the failed Chris Amon team and the Amon chassis, failing to qualify in 1974. In 1976, he raced for the Dutch Boro team, before getting to do the last 3 races of the year in the Martini-sponsored Brabham. He finished 17th once and retired from the final 2 races. He qualified within a second of experienced teammate Carlos Pace at the last 2 races. In 1977, he'd make his final F1 appearances with BRM and Team Surtees, who would both be soon disappearing into the void. Larry Perkins would have his greatest successes in Australia, winning the Bathurst 1000 6 times between 1977 and 2003. Number 33, Manfred Winkelhock. Manfred of the famous Winkelhock racing family had a few seasons in Formula 1, failing to qualify for Arrows in 1980, followed by 3 seasons with ATS from 1982 to 1984. He filled in for 1 race for the Brabham team at the 1984 Portuguese Grand Prix, finishing 10th. In 1985 he had raced for the Skull Bandit team, but was sadly killed in a sports car race at Motorsport. 22 years later, his son Marcus Winkelhock would make a sole appearance in Formula 1, as well as Manfred's brother Joachim, the 1993 British Touring Car Champion. Number 32, Richard Roberts. One of the most unremarkable Formula 1 drivers ever, Richard Roberts did not accomplish much on his way up to Formula 1. Racing in the British and French Formula 3 series, he took a couple of wins and finished runner-up in the British F3 in 1973. That is not a Formula 1 worthy CV, but he paid for a seat with the Brabham team for 1974. To be fair, he wasn't quick, but he did finish 2 of his 3 starts. He didn't have enough money to continue and was dropped for the rest of the season. He'd turn up in sports car events in Formula 2, but his career was done after 1976. 4 years of racing and 3 F1 starts. That's not bad. Number 31, Ricky von Opel. The great-grandson of the founder of the Opel car company and now a Buddhist monk who has not been heard from except by some close acquaintances. Ricky von Opel may be slightly eccentric. The American-born son of a German represented Liechtenstein in Formula 1, also having a very short racing career, partaking between 1971 and 1974. He won the British F3 Championship in 1972, raced a few times for Ensign in Formula 1 in 1973, and joined Brabham in 1974, taking over from Richard Roberts for 6 races. He didn't have much more success, failing to qualify for the street circuit of Monaco and later Dijon. He'd make 4 appearances, finishing 9th in Sweden and Belgium. After that, he converted to Buddhism and went off to be a monk somewhere. Number 30, Chris Irwin. Whilst Chris Irwin only made 1 appearance for Brabham, he did finish 7th, so he almost scored points. He made his Formula 1 debut for Brabham at the British Grand Prix in 1966, qualifying in the midfield and surviving the race to finish 7th, 2 laps down off winner Jack Brabham, also in a Brabham. He'd make some appearances for Reg Parnell in 1967, but his career was ended after a horrifying crash in a Ford P68, practicing for the Nürburgring 1000 km race. He's still alive but is rarely seen in motorsport circles these days. Number 29, Damon Hill. The final ever Brabham driver, future Formula 1 world champion Damon Hill made his Formula 1 debut for Brabham in 1992. This was 20 years after his father Graham raced for the team. We will get to him later. For Damon, it was a pretty miserable experience. The dying Brabham team couldn't give Damon a lot and he failed to qualify for 6 of his 8 entries. The 2 races he did get to race in, the British and Hungarian Grand Prix, he finished 11th and 16th but was 4 laps down in both and around 5 to 7 seconds a lap off the pace. He later raced for Williams, Arrows and Jordan and now turns up on Formula 1 programming every now and again. He's lucky Brabham didn't kill his career. 28, Elio De Angelis. The signing of Italian Elio De Angelis was a coup for the Brabham team. By the time he joined Brabham in 1986, he already had 7 years in Formula 1 behind him and had taken 2 wins with Lotus, finishing 3rd and 5th overall in the 2 previous years. Elio had got his start with Shadow in 1979, but joined Lotus in 1980, took his first win at the Austrian Grand Prix in 1982, patiently stayed with the team through an atrocious 1983 and took a win at Imola in 1985. Sadly, he only got 4 races for Brabham before being killed at a test session at Paul Ricard after a rear ring failure. Unfortunately, none of these would be very successful drives with an 8th place and 3 retirements due to the hideously unreliable BMW engine. Elio De Angelis was the youngest driver to get a Formula 1 podium after taking 2nd in the 1980 Brazilian Grand Prix, a record he held until Ralf Schumacher replaced him 17 years later. 27, Corrado Fabi. You'll notice that most of the drivers so far did very few races for Brabham. That is also true of Corrado Fabi. Corrado Fabi was hired by Brabham to race in the Grand Prix brother Teo Fabi couldn't race in due to his commitments to the kart series in America. Corrado had 1 season of Formula 1 with Osella in 1983, but would only appear 3 times for Brabham in 1984. The usual reliability problems saw him retire at the Monaco and Canadian Grand Prix, but he put in a good drive to 7th at the Dallas Grand Prix, where he even outqualified his teammate, Nelson Piquet. Whilst older brother Teo would race until the mid-90s, Corrado quit racing to take care of the family business. 26, Derek Warwick. The man who replaced Elio De Angelis after his fatal accident, apparently because he was one of the few unemployed drivers not to phone up asking for De Angelis' job whilst his body was still warm. Derek Warwick joined for the rest of the 1986 season, and it was a terrible year with reliability being the biggest enemy. This was the first season since his time with Tolman back in 1982 that Warwick failed to score points, with a best 7th at the British Grand Prix. Warwick left for Arrows at year's end and spent a few years there before doing a season with Lotus, leaving Formula 1 for a successful time in World Sports Car Championship and returning for a single season with Footwork in 1993, later finishing his career in sports cars and touring car racing. 25, Andrea de Cesaris. Given that Andrea de Cesaris had a reputation for crashing and the Brabham cars had a reputation for breaking down, it was a surprise de Cesaris ever finished a race for the team. Well, he did. Twice. In 16 races. He did get a podium, however. 3rd place at the 1987 Belgian Grand Prix. These would be the only points he would score in his single Brabham season. De Cesaris even retired from 12 races in a row, but in his defence, that was due to Brabham's woeful reliability. Having already raced for Alfa Romeo, McLaren, Ligier and Minardi, his move to Brabham would begin a slide down the grid with Real, BMS Scuderia, Tyrrell, Jordan and Sauber. But the Italian had a very long Formula 1 career, from the 1980 Canadian Grand Prix to his final race at the 1994 European Grand Prix. His 1 season at Brabham is best not remembered. 24, Riccardo Zannino. The Argentinian was never more than a substitute driver who got his start through an enormous piece of luck. He happened to attend the 1979 Canadian Grand Prix when Niki Lauda quit the Brabham team and Formula 1. The 1979 British F1 champion Riccardo Zannino was selected to take his place. He never scored points, but seeing as he only had 9 races, he did a pretty good job. 7th on his debut and 7th at the 1980 Argentine Grand Prix. He was replaced halfway through 1980 by Hector Rebecca, and outside of 2 Tyrrell drives in 1981, would not get another chance in Formula 1. When the Falklands War started, unfortunately sponsorship for Riccardo Zannino ran out, and his motor racing career was basically over. 23, Jochen Rindt. Formula One's only posthumous champion, Jochen Rindt, raced for the Brabham team in 1968 after a few relatively successful years with the Cooper team. Rindt had finished third overall in 1966 behind John Surtees and Jack Brabham, but had still never won a race. He wouldn't win for Brabham either, only taking a couple of podiums but being let down by poor reliability. As you can see, that was a problem in every era for the team. He left Brabham after a single year and joined Lotus, taking his first win in 1969 and the championship in 1970, before sadly being killed in a crash at Monza. That wouldn't stop him becoming champion. Number 22, Andrea de Adamic. For someone who had a brief time in Formula 1, Andrea de Adamic has a habit of appearing on these lists. Having started his time in Formula 1 with McLaren and Ferrari, de Adamic had dropped down to first March and then Team Surtees, but made his final 5 Formula 1 appearances for the Brabham team. 4th place at Zolder, followed by 7th at Monaco along with 3 retirements, was all that de Adamic managed. But they were some decent performances for a part-time driver in a slow Brabham car. He was injured in a mass crash at the British Grand Prix, and that was enough to force him into retirement. He is considered to be the Murray Walker of Italian commentary, according to one Reddit post I found, and has been heavily involved with the N Technology team. Number 21, Mark Blundell. Journeyman Mark Blundell was another victim of Brabham's decline. Despite not having a lot of success on his way up to Formula 1 outside of a couple of Formula 4 championships, Blundell debuted with Brabham in 1991. As you can imagine, within the last lights of day for the team, it was a tough year with a single point for Blundell at the Belgian Grand Prix, even failing to qualify for a couple of races. Blundell would miss Formula 1 for 1992, winning for 24 Hours of Le Mans with Peugeot, instead before returning with Ligier, Tyrrell and McLaren. After Formula 1 he raced in the kart series in America, before winding down his career into the new millennium. Number 20, Wilson Fittipaldi. The less well known of the Fittipaldi brothers, the older Fittipaldi brothers that is, I think it's fair to say Wilson Fittipaldi was the less desirable of the two, but he debuted with Brabham in 1972, the same year Emerson won his first Formula 1 title. Wilson meanwhile scored no points. He stayed with the team for 1973 and did better, 3 points scored and he finished a lot more races. After skipping 1974 he returned with his own team sponsored by Brazilian sugar daddies Copersucar in 1975 and soon after retired from racing to concentrate on team management, hiring his brother Emerson whilst arguably he was still in his prime. The team survived until 1982, but Wilson continued to be involved with motorsport, including managing his son Christian's racing career. Number 19, Graham Hill. So to the second of the Hills on this list. Shame Phil Hill never raced for Brabham. You might be surprised to see a Formula 1 legend like Graham Hill down so far low on this list, but he had his success with BRM and Lotus and joined Brabham towards the tail end of his time in Formula 1. Graham Hill's 2 seasons at Brabham were very disappointing. The double champion only scored 6 points in 2 seasons, finishing in the points just 4 times, never higher than 5th. It was a time of upheaval for the team, with the retirement of Jack Brabham and the team changing ownership around that time also. Graham would add the 24 Hours of Le Mans to his Indy 500 win and Formula 1 championships, Tasman Series wins and his class championship in the British saloon cars. He started his own team, Embassy Hill, in 1973, and this would see out his time in Formula 1 and sadly his life, as he was killed in a plane crash along with several others on the way back from testing in France. He never got to see his son Damon follow in his footsteps. Number 18, Tim Schenken. The Australian had won the British Formula 3 Championship in 1968, along with a few other accolades, and was soon racing in the peak of single-seaters and sports car racing. After a few races with Frank Williams in 1970, he joined Brabham for the 1971 season. It wasn't great, he didn't score at most races, but he did get a podium at the Austrian Grand Prix and scored points in Germany. It was not enough for him to be kept on, and he would get the honour of being the only guy to drive a Trojan Formula 1 car. He also raced for Team Surtees, but his time in Formula 1 was short, and he would continue his career in sports car racing and in Australian motorsport, being involved with Formula 1 as a clerk of the course for the Australian Grand Prix. Number 17, Mark Surer. The Swiss driver had his best Formula 1 season with Brabham. Mark Surer spent his early F1 career jumping between backmarker teams, such as Team Ensign and ATS, before spending a few years with Arrows. It was with Arrows that he linked up with BMW and got the gig for 1 season at Brabham. I say it was his best season, but he did only score 5 points. Most of the time he was just outside the points positions, and unlike a lot of these drivers, he wasn't badly affected by reliability, only retiring from 4 races. He was a fair way behind teammate Nelson Piquet, but even Piquet didn't have a stellar year. Mark Sirra left Brabham and did a few more races for Arrows before a rallying crash ended his racing career. An academic study in 2016 laid an argument for him being the 17th greatest Formula 1 driver of all time, and I can see it. A decent driver who was let down by poor machinery. Number 16, Teo Fabi. The final driver of part 2 is Teo Fabi, brother of previously mentioned Corrado Fabi. You'll notice there are a lot of Italians on this part of the list, and that is because most of these drivers raced for the team in the 80s when Brabham had Italian sponsors. Teo Fabi is yet another Italian who had a weird season with Brabham in 1984. He split his time between Formula 1 and the kart series in America, but after a mediocre time in both series, he ditched America for Formula 1 and saw a steady improvement in results. All for naught as he was dropped at year's end. He retired from 8 of his 12 starts, but did nab a podium in Detroit. He'd finished his Formula 1 career with Tolman and Benetton before heading back to America, where he was a decent midfield runner, also grabbing a couple of podiums at Le Mans. Number 15, Martin Brundle. A name familiar to anyone who has watched Formula 1 in the last 40 years. Martin Brundle has been driver and commentator since 1984. After finding some success in touring cars and a hell of a battle with Ayrton Senna in British Formula 3, Martin Brundle debuted in Formula 1 with the Tyrrell team and spent the next 15 years jumping around from team to team. After a few difficult years with Tyrrell and a shockingly poor one with Zakspeed, Martin Brundle decided to take some time away from Formula 1 and began a long successful partnership with TWR Jaguar in sports car racing. In 1989 he returned to Formula 1 with the Brabham team, but after some initial good performances that didn't yield good results, Brabham's form nosedived for the rest of the year and Brundle went back to sports car racing in 1990, winning Le Mans. He returned to an even more broken Brabham team for 1991, now really on their last legs, and Brundle did his best but couldn't drag the Yamaha powered car to any really good results. He spent the rest of his time in Formula 1 with Benetton, Ligier, McLaren and Jordan, and got good results and had the occasional massive crash. He retired from racing after the 1999 season and has been in the commentary booth ever since. The poor results don't tell the full story of Brundle at Brabham. There were plenty of good performances, but the car didn't match the driver and rarely made it to the end of races, if it was capable of qualifying for them at all. Number 14, Stefano Modena. The 1987 International F3000 champion was rewarded with a one-off drive with Brabham to finish off the 1987 Formula 1 season. It proved to be a lot tougher than Modena was prepared for, and he retired due to exhaustion. Desperate to stay in Formula 1, Modena joined Eurorun for 1988, which was a poor choice, but returned to Brabham in 1989 to partner Martin Brundle, scoring the team's only points at Monaco with a third place, inherited from Brundle after a battery issue. But the poorly funded team struggled to keep performances steady and they dropped off towards the tail end of the year. Stefano Modena stayed with the team for 1990, but it was not a smooth ride, with new Brabham owner Joachim Luthi jailed for fraud and the team having an ownership crisis. It was a dreadful year. Modena scored points at the first race and that was all for Brabham. Much like Martin Brundle, performances don't match the results and Brabham badly let down both drivers. Stefano Modena moved to Tyrrell for 1991 and put in some excellent drives, but it still just never worked out for him, nor did it in 1992 at Jordan. And after that, Modena moved on to touring cars, taking wins in DTM and having his final racing year in the revived DTM series in 2000. Number 13, Hector Rebaca. The Mexican businessman who self-financed his whole racing career with the help of his father, Hector Rebaca spent his early years in sports car and Formula Atlantic on both sides of the Atlantic. Eventually he decided to give Formula 1 a go and had 6 attempts with Hesketh in 1977, failing to qualify for 5 of those races and retiring from the German Grand Prix. He went a different route for the next couple of years. Running his own team, he scored a single point in the Customer Lotus before the debut of his own chassis, finished the team off after just 3 races in the HR100. He joined Brabham halfway through 1980, replacing Riccardo Zannino, and scored his second Formula 1 point in Canada. His final year in Formula 1 was his most successful, scoring a few points finishes and finishing 10th in the overall standings. He took a win in the kart series in 1982 and retired from racing in 1983. Number 12, Hans-Joachim Stuck. I'm not going to cover the entirety of Hans-Joachim Stuck's 50-year career. The guy still races occasionally. He finished second in the European GT2 Pro-Am category in 2021 for Pete's sake. In those 50 years, Hans-Joachim Stuck has done a lot of winning, starting with the 1972 Deutsche Rennsport Meisterschaft, and then finishing second to Patrick de Peyler in the 1974 European Formula 2 Championship, ahead of Jacques Lafitte, Jean-Pierre Jabouet, Patrick Tambay and John Watson, in what must have been a stacked championship. Meanwhile, he started his Formula 1 career with March, racing for the team between 1974 and 1977, whilst also racing in sports cars. He joined Brabham in 1977 when the team ran under the Martini Racing banner, and Stuck nabbed a couple of podiums, but despite some good results, he was replaced for 1978 by Niki Lauda. He raced for Shadow in ATS, but as he was a tall man, Formula 1 cars were becoming uncomfortably small for him. And Stuck moved back to sports cars, winning Le Mans 3 times with 7 podiums and taking the 1990 DTM title. He was still winning 24-hour races in the mid-2000s. An absolute legend. Number 11, Rolf Stommelin. Another quality sports car driver who had one hell of a strange Formula 1 career. Rolf Stommelin raced in Formula 1 for 9 years, rarely did the full season, and raced for some very unusual teams. He actually debuted in Formula 1 in a Roy Winkelmann-owned Lotus, finishing 8th in the German Grand Prix of 1969. He brought Auto, Motor und Sport sponsorship to Brabham for 1970 and had his best Formula 1 season with a podium in Austria. After his single season with Brabham, he raced for Surtees and Team Eifelland Caravans before rejoining Brabham for a few races in 1973 without points and ending his time in Formula 1 with Embassy Hill, where he was involved in a big crash that killed 5 spectators, RAM, Hesketh and a new team called Arrows. He also joined Brabham a third time for a couple of races in 1976, scoring a point. Outside of Formula 1, he scored multiple podiums at Le Mans, won the 24 Hours of Daytona 4 times, but sadly he was killed in 1983 driving a Porsche, which he did for much of his career at Riverside. Number 10, John Watson. A debut in a Brabham run by the short-lived Goldie Hexagon Racing before standing in for Brabham at Watkins Glen, Watson retired from both the races he started in 1973. After a full season for Hexagon in 1974, he raced for Surtees, Lotus and Penske in 1975. Watson went on to take a shock first win for Penske at Austria in 1976, which earned him a full-time drive with Brabham for 1977 and 1978. There were some incredible performances in 1978, including almost taking a win until a fuel issue relegated him to second on the last lap. In fact, the car hampered Watson a hell of a lot during his time with Brabham. In 1978, he would finish 6th overall and even outpaced teammate Niki Lauda at times. Watson would move on to McLaren and become a real title contender before he hung up his F1 helmet in 1983, bar a one-off drive in 1985. He attempted the 24 Hours of Le Mans for a few years without success, and the 5-time race winner would move on to commentary and various journalistic roles. Number 9, Niki Lauda. The great Niki Lauda only makes it to 9th on this list. You have to understand the 3-time Formula 1 champion did not have a very happy couple of years with the Brabham team. Lauda had an understated start to his time in Formula 1 with teams such as March and BRM. Points were very rare. In fact, he didn't score points until his 18th race in 1973. From there though, he joined Ferrari, took 15 wins for the Scuderia and 2 of his World Championships. But after the famous events of 1976, Lauda's relationship with Ferrari turned sour and he left for Brabham and $1 million. Unfortunately, reliability would be a huge issue. Niki Lauda only won a couple of races for Brabham, both in 1978, the first of which was in the famous fan car in Sweden, which was dropped after one race because of protests from just about everyone else. Lauda failed to finish in 9 races in 1978, but the races he did finish, he finished on the podium, and it was good enough for 4th in the final standings. 1979 was an embarrassment for Lauda. He retired from 11 of 13 races and quit the team before the final 2 rounds. He finished 14th overall, his worst season since leaving BRM. He retired from racing and started a successful airline before returning to McLaren and winning another championship, being involved in Formula 1 until his death in 2019. One of the all-time legends, a race winner for Brabham, but his main success was found elsewhere. Number 8, Jackie Ickx. The Belgium has done it all in motorsport, except winning the Formula 1 title. 6 wins at Le Mans, he's won the Bathurst 1000 and the Dakar Rally. He's a champion in Can-Am and touring cars.
In Formula 1, he won 8 races and finished runner-up in the championship twice. One of those times was with Brabham. After starting with Tyrrell in Cooper in part-time drives in 1966 and 1967, Ickx raced for Ferrari in 1968 and had his first successes, winning in France and finishing 4th overall. In 1969, he joined the Brabham team after a slow start. He won in Germany and Canada and finished runner-up overall behind Jackie Stewart. As good as his season with Brabham was, Ickx moved back to Ferrari, had even more success before seeing out his time in Formula 1 with McLaren, Williams, Lotus, Walter Wolf, Ensign and Ligier. Jackie Ickx has to be one of the best never to win the Formula 1 championship. Number 7, Dan Gurney. The second ever Brabham driver and the first not named Brabham was American Dan Gurney. After starting in Formula 1 with Ferrari, after impressing at Le Mans in 1959, Gurney raced for BRM and Porsche before joining the new Brabham team in 1963. Gurney would take the team's first championship win at the 1964 French Grand Prix and would take 10 podiums in his 3 seasons with the Brabham team, often outpacing the legendary Jack Brabham. He left the team to form the Anglo-American Racers and took a win in the Eagle, but the American efforts were short-lived and not very successful. Gurney would do a one-off race for Brabham in 1968 and a few for McLaren, but soon returned to America, where he would have a number of wins in the USAC series and a few podiums in the Indy 500. He was instrumental, along with other team owners, in the formation of the Kart Racing series as it broke away from USAC. Dan Gurney is one of the greatest American race drivers ever, which is in itself quite a distinction to have, but he was also one of the best Americans in Formula 1 and the best American to race for Brabham. Number 6, Denny Hulme. Dan Gurney's replacement at Brabham was Kiwi Denny Hulme, a man who waited in the wings and jumped at the chance to make his debut in Formula 1 with Brabham, having raced the car in various non-championship events. In 1966, when Brabham hit the front of the field and Denny Hulme took multiple podiums on his way to 4th in the championship. In 1967, he went one better and won the Drivers' Championship with wins at Monaco and the Nordschleife and a podium at almost every other race. He didn't stay with Brabham beyond the 1967 season, joining McLaren for the rest of his time in Formula 1, winning 6 more races. He left motor racing behind in 1974, but would often return in touring car races in his native New Zealand, and was a regular in touring cars and truck racing throughout the 1980s. He was a big fan of the Bathurst 1000 and raced in the mountains many times, sadly passing away during the 1991 running of the event. Number 5, Riccardo Patrese. The Italian had a long career in Formula 1 and that included 2 spells with Brabham. Neither was overly successful, but as befits a man like Patrese, he was very good over every season, even when the car did not work, which was often. Patrese began his time in Formula 1 with Shadow, but really made a name for himself with the very young Arrows team, taking the British outfit's best results in Formula 1. This earned him a drive with Brabham in 1982. Reliability was a massive issue, but Patrese did take his first win at the incredible 1982 Monaco Grand Prix, even after spinning late on and dropping to 3rd. Despite the win, Patrese only finished 10th in the championship because the fragile Brabham rarely made it to the end of races. 1983 was even worse and Patrese left the team after taking his second win for Brabham. His time at Benetton was again heavily affected by reliability and he returned to Brabham in 1986. The team had one of the most powerful engines, fragile engines, but certainly powerful. The team were a shadow of their former selves at this point and results were atrocious. Despite Patrese's best efforts and as Brabham began their swift descent to the end of their life, Patrese left for a successful spell at Williams before rejoining Benetton for one final year in 1993, finishing his racing career with spells in touring cars. Absolutely deserves to be in the top 5. If the Brabham cars of the mid-80s were capable of finishing races, Patrese could have been a title contender. As it is, we'll never know if he was capable of leading a championship with a top team. Number 4, Carlos Pace. The tragic story of the immensely talented Carlos Pace, who barely got a decade in motorsport before his death. He followed in the footsteps of fellow Brazilian Emerson Fittipaldi, racing in Brazil in the late 60s before moving to the UK for 1970. He won one of the British Formula 3 championships of several, and moved up to Formula 2 with Williams, but did not score any points. Frank Williams moved Carlos Pace up to Formula 1 for 1972, but the Brazilian struggled in a backmarker car, scoring a couple of points. He moved to Surtees for 1973 and half of 1974 and did a lot better, even getting a podium in Austria. He moved to the Goldie Hexagon Racing team, but only briefly as Brabham came calling towards the tail end of the 1974 season, and Pace quickly got up to speed with the car. finishing second at the final race of the year in America. Brabham were competitive in 1975, and Carlos Pace took his only Formula 1 win in front of his home crowd and helped Brabham to second in the Constructors. 1976 saw a change from Brabham to Alfa Romeo engines, which proved unreliable and results were tough to come by, but the car improved for 1977 and Pace started the year with a second place in Argentina and competitive performances at Brazil and South Africa that were halted by reliability issues. Carlos Pace sadly died in a light aircraft crash a couple of weeks later and never got a chance to live up to his full potential. The Interlagos track is named in his honour, and if not for reliability, he may have had many more wins for Brabham. Number 3, Carlos Reutemann. From one Carlos to another, Carlos Reutemann was the top Brabham driver for a fair while before chasing Niki Lauda out of Ferrari and into the warm welcoming arms of the Brabham team. Reutemann joined Brabham in 1972 after finishing runner-up to Ronnie Peterson in European Formula 2. Reutemann managed to get pole on his debut in his home country of Argentina, but the Brabham was off the pace and he didn't score many points. The car would improve over the next couple of years, with Reutemann taking a couple of podiums in 1973 and his first wins in 1974. Issues with reliability meant he only finished 6th overall. 1975 would be the closest he would come to winning the Formula 1 Championship with Brabham, despite only taking one win in Germany. He was more consistent through the year and netted a fair few podiums, and finished 3rd overall, although some way behind champion Niki Lauda. The team switched to Alfa Romeo engines in 1976 and reliability was woeful, so Reutemann left mid-season, joining Ferrari and then Williams, where he became a real title contender. He'd continue racing occasionally into the 80s and spent much of his later life as a politician. Carlos Reutemann died in 2021, but Carlos kept the Brabham team going between their successes in the 60s and 80s and was the best of the Brabham drivers racing for the team in the 70s. Number 2, Jack Brabham. The man who started it all and its first champion, somehow only good enough for second. Jack Brabham is a top star in Formula 1 history. Arguments can be made that he was one of the greatest of all time. He's that good. A lot of his Formula 1 success came before Brabham team was formed, winning 2 Formula 1 championships with the Cooper team. Whilst winning these championships, he was joined by Ron Tauranac in starting the Motor Racing Development or Brabham Racing team. Jack left Cooper to race for his own team from 1962 onwards, scoring the first points for a Brabham chassis at Watkins Glen. It was a rough start, but eventually Brabham in the Brabham, along with teammates from 1963 onwards, started to score good points. Whilst podiums were scored over the next few years, Jack would have to wait till the French Grand Prix of 1966, which kicked off a 4-race win streak that helped Jack Brabham to take his 3rd and final title, with the team bearing his own name. Brabham finished second to his teammate Denny Hulme in 1967, and 1968 was atrocious, with Jack retiring from almost every race, and results didn't really improve over the next couple of years. Brabham eventually sold up to Ron Tauranac and retired from racing. Much to his wife's chagrin, his 3 sons also took up racing and reached a pretty high level. Unfortunately, one of them's dodgy as hell, but at least he has 2 good sons. Number 1, Nelson Piquet. It would take one hell of a driver to keep the team founder and first champion off the top spot, and Nelson Piquet was one hell of a driver. Piquet had broken records in British Formula 3 and was rewarded for his fine form with a drive for Ensign. Thanks, I guess. But then he got a drive with BS Fabrications. Brabham picked Piquet up for the final race of 1978 and kept him on for 1979, which turned out to be a good bit of business. Much of 1979 was spent at the side of the track under a cloud of smoke as the Alfa Romeo engines were hideously unreliable. The story of Brabham is made up of broken engines. For 1980 they switched to Cosworth power and results improved. Piquet took his first win at Long Beach and 2 others later in the year, finishing runner-up to Alan Jones in the championship. He did get a consolation prize in the BMW M1 Championship, which had a ton of Formula 1 talent racing in it. Nelson Piquet won his first championship in 1981, taking advantage of the squabbling Williams teammates to take the crown. For 1982, Brabham switched engines again from Cosworth to BMW. Immensely powerful but incredibly unreliable, Nelson Piquet retired from nearly every race and ended the year 11th, but bounced back in 1983 to win his 2nd championship. His final 2 years with the team were plagued with reliability issues, but Piquet did take the occasional win before moving on to Williams and becoming a 3-time champion before ending his time in Formula 1 with Lotus and Benetton. taking his final win at the Canadian Grand Prix of 1991. Since then, we have seen his son race in Formula 1 and become a controversial moment. Interviews with Piquet have surfaced where he has referred to many in scandalous ways. He's now banned from the F1 paddock, but a controversial team like Brabham almost deserve to have a controversial individual as their greatest ever driver. So we have finally come to the end of our ranking every Brabham Formula 1 driver ever from worst to best trilogy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have placed any of these drivers differently? Maybe you have a different idea for the best Brabham driver ever. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, lots more motorsport content on the way as the racing scene really starts to kick into high gear for 2024. Thank you very much for watching and have a good one.